And we are on. What's good, guys? Welcome back to the Talking At the Movies side episodes, bonus episodes. This is original versus remake. I'm Eddie Antonio.
And I'm Moe.
And this week, we are looking at two gangster classics that revolutionized the genre, basically. Scarface from 1932, was it?
Yep.
32. Versus Scarface 1983. Now, a lot of people still, to this day, don't even realize that the Al Pacino Scarface was a remake of an old movie. But indeed it was. And yeah, Mo, you watched them both?
I've indeed seen both of them for the first time as well.
You never seen the
I have never seen Scarface 83 before last night.
Wow. That is like any kid who was born in the 80s or 90s, like that's part of their childhood watching that, man.
You know what I've realized, like out of the 80s you could name almost like any screwball comedy and I've probably seen it, but if you start talking about action films and gangster films, chances are I haven't seen it.
Wow, that's okay, this is going to be fascinating now.
Yeah.
This is actually going to be very fascinating. Okay, so before we get into a deep dive in each film, your general over-the-top thoughts, how did you find this experience?
So I think we caught a little bit of this on our last episode of our podcast. So I found the 1932 version of Scarface quite difficult to get into, but you said preserve with it, just keep going, watch it, right? And I think I found my problem was the accents were so thick, I was actually having trouble understanding all the dialogue.
Really?
So I turned on the subtitles, and that immediately, I think, fixed the problem for me because I could actually understand what the hell was going on.
That is bizarre because I didn't find any accents that were difficult to understand.
Oh, I found it really, really tough. And once the subtitles were on, I was able to actually then follow the narrative. And you know what's really odd? I actually found that to be true of the 83 movie as well. I had to turn the subs on. Because I was, it's like if you look at Al Pacino, man, he's got that really like put on thick accent. Everyone around him, like you could understand most of the words, but like maybe every third word was kind of mumbled, and you were like, "What the hell did he just say?" And it wasn't one of these ones where the sound mix on some films drowns out the dialogue. You could hear the dialogue. It was just the accents.
You just weren't used to it. Maybe that's one advantage of my past occupation of being in retail for so long. I guess you just get used to the sound of all of these crazy accents from people from around the world and crazy.
Oh, for a minute I thought you were going to say from like your past of being like a gangster in Miami.
the Cubans and the Italians. Right, Mo, you want to break down the synopsis for Scarface 1932?
So Scarface 1932, an ambitious and nearly insane violent gangster climbs the ladder of success in the mob, but his weaknesses prove to be his downfall.
Yes.
Actually, if you just take that little paragraph, that's almost like the synopsis for any gangster film you've ever watched.
Rise to power and then the inevitable fall at the end.
The greed and the ego.
Yeah. So this actually surprised me what surprised me the most about this is how much of the 1983 version is actually in this. Like, that really shocked me. Like,
did you think, and you might have a different thought process because you've seen the 83 one probably before many times. As I was watching it, it almost felt to me like it's a totally different film, but at the same time it's the same film, and it's almost like a director's cut with like a slightly different alternative ending.
It really is. Yeah. Okay, that is true. What was interesting? Directed by Howard Hawks.
Yep.
Interestingly, produced by Howard Hughes, the mad legend.
Yep.
A man who had like many hats, inventor. Planes, directed movies. Like, this guy was
ran the mob out of Vegas.
Yeah, and eventually went crazy and grew his fingernails out. And what's The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio, guys? If you're not too familiar with Howard Hughes,
that is on my list of movies to watch, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah. But Scarface originally, well, it wasn't originally. The censors ended up wanting this to be changed, and I think in some places in America it was changed. The title to either Scarface, subtitle Shame of a Nation, or in some places it was just called Shame of a Nation.
Oh, right. Okay, didn't know that.
And that bit at the beginning where it has the whole thing of this movie is done to highlight injustices in the government to do something, that was all added because of censors.
Oh, right. I guess like all these years later, that actually helps set the tone and the scene for the film, right? Because we're so far removed from that period.
That's true. And it was based on a book, actually, that came out a few years earlier, which in itself told the story of Al Pacino. Not Al Pacino, what am I saying?
Al Capone, right.
Yeah,
I was like, hey, what's Al Pacino doing in Chicago?
Yeah, I'm going crazy there. Based on Al Capone. Like, even that whole thing where the firing squad, guys, this is Valentine's Day Massacre or Al Pacino.
It's actually really interesting, right? How many of the gangster tropes you see, even in like modern cinema, actually are actually seen in this film, right?
No, definitely. And crazily, apparently the director or the producer, one of the two, said that they ended up meeting Al Capone and he loved this film.
I can imagine.
He loved it. Which is like, fuck, I thought he would have been like locked up by this point, but no. Shows you, man, he was around for a long time. So overall, Mo, what are your thoughts? Once you finally got into it, you got around the difficulty of the subtitles.
So before I go into the film, this is like my thought process as I'm watching this, right? Because I think this might possibly be the oldest film I've ever seen, and actually, and this is just another tick in the box for filming on film, right? That the inventors of film were just so far ahead of their time. It still looked so good, like quality wise.
Really does. The texture of the image, darks and the whites, the way they contrast, and just even the way it's directed. I was really impressed with some of the shots.
Exactly. As you were watching it, did you start wondering, I wonder how they did that? Oh, look, that's a car chase. And you kind of think, like, I wonder how they did. But my obviously my mind racing ahead, right, was like, this movie was before World War II, right? Everybody in this film who's associated with this film in the production and the acting are probably all dead.
Yeah.
That's how old the film is.
I think the one that lasted, I was looking up a couple of the people in this. And I think the sister, Seska, Anna Dvorak, she lived, I think, the longest out of all of them. 2003, I think she lasted.
Oh, crikey. Okay.
Wow.
That's because if you think like these were people who were probably in their 20s and 30s by the time they filmed this, and that was like 80, approaching 80 odd years ago.
Yeah, it's so mad when you keep these numbers. It's like
but the film itself, right? So I've got to say, there are sometimes you watch like old classic films and they are just really difficult to get into. This film, still to this day, just resonates with like all the sort of like the classic themes of gangster films. And actually, once I got into it, I could understand it's actually a brilliant film. And the fact that I watched Scarface the following night, I could kind of see like all the similarities, but you also kind of see how different films were back then, right? So all the violence is kind of implied. I think the only real violence you see are a couple of punches. Like most of the gunshot killings happen off camera.
Love the slow fights in
also. Oh yeah. So slow, right? The only real deaths you actually see are like the ones where the police kill people, right? So when you see Seska at the end, you actually see her getting shot, and all the others are kind of implied. But you see, and I think this might be in general just a trope in like gangster films, but women are really seen as like property. They don't generally have a role in the film themselves. They're either a side character or they're there just to be put down, beaten upon, or just something to help move the plot along, right?
I have to say, like, I have to give it up for that Seska, because she wasn't a shrinking violet. She really was a woman who just wanted to live her life how she wanted to live it.
Yeah, I do wonder if that's just a sign of those times, because that would have been the time where probably women wanted more independence. They probably wanted to be able to go to work. They probably wanted the vote. So it was all around that kind of era, right? So
you just wanted to party, though. That's what she wanted to do.
Well, some people want to party. Some people want to go out to work,
Terrible dancer, I've got to say. She was trying to seduce the guy, and it was all shoulders like, hey, you want to dance with me? I'm thinking, no, not like that.
Was there any kissing in that film? Because I remember when they were dancing, they had their cheeks like side to side. So it's almost even like there was no overt like sexuality in this film. There was no like long lingering shots or like short clothes or anything like that. Again, which is probably like a snapshot of that particular time period.
The movie was actually made at a time when the board of censors, what we know now as the ratings, whatever you call it,
the MPPA or whatever they are.
That hadn't been established yet. Like, this movie fell between the cracks of the old system and the new. So they were really free to kind of do what they want. I think that's why it has such a problem with the violence or implied violence. But for the time, it was actually still on Amazon showing as an 18, which was really interesting. Yeah. Really interesting.
Well, I guess the themes are quite adult, right? Because essentially I don't know if this was set like during Prohibition, but obviously they are just going around forcing. They're essentially forcing establishments to buy beer from them at an inflated cost and more of it.
Yeah, it does. I don't know why it sticks with me, but just the aesthetics of it, the vehicles, the clothes, to know that was just a decade before.
Yeah,
really kind of makes this film feel like a time capsule. It really does. So
absolute classic.
The performances, Paul Mooney in particular.
You know what? So they all do seem to kind of ham it up, but I guess that was just how acting was back then, right? They really do play into like some of the stereotypes again, like with the really thick accents, and then you kind of have. Again, I guess Paul Mooney.
You're hearing, like, I know there was this transatlantic way of talking back then, where they
had like. Well, I guess they were going for like thick Italian Brooklyn style accents.
Oh, it was in Chicago, so there's none of that.
Weren't these like Italian gangsters?
Tony was, but most of them were just. It's just I don't know. Maybe I got to watch it again. Maybe I'm just oblivious to it. But
I also did like.
What do you think of Paul? You find him as an intriguing.
I found him to be a complete nutcase, right? But he really was one of these guys that essentially, well, he was almost like the template for the modern day Tony, right? He literally was somebody who had nothing, who wanted everything, who didn't want to work for it, but essentially found a way to get it, right? But the things that I found really amazing, and again, because the film was so old, he was like saying, I've bought so many shirts that I'm only going to wear it once before I put it in the laundry. Or he says, like, come and sit on this mattress.
Get rid of it, wasn't he?
No, he was saying send it to the laundry, is what he said. And then he was saying, like, sit on this mattress. It's one of these ones with the springs inside. Those are the sort of things that I found really fascinating. Yeah. So all these things that are like so taken for granted. Or the fact, I guess the telephone was probably a fairly novel invention because he had a secretary trying to answer his calls for him.
That was my one gripe with this film. That character that was like his just gopher guy. That was that one character that was there just for comedy. Just seemed so out of place. Like,
even right at the end where he's like dying and he's like answering the phone call. He's like, what the fuck? Yeah, and Tony's just standing there watching it like a dying man answering his phone.
Just think, what was this character doing there? Why did they feel the need to add this clown in this movie?
I found the ending of the film really strange, though.
You have
Seska, right?
Yeah.
Who's just witnessed her brother being brutally shot in front of her. Not her brother, her husband being shot in front of her by her brother.
Were they married at that point, or were they just?
They were married. Yeah, no, they were married. She goes, "We got married yesterday, Tony. We wanted to surprise you, right?" And obviously, Tony realizes what he's done is wrong, right? But and his sister turns up with the intention of killing him because she's got a gun. She's going to shoot him. Yeah. But then all of a sudden, because the police are there and they're waiting to gun him down, she changes her mind and it turns into a Bonnie and Clyde.
He loves her brother. That deep down, she knows that they're the same. They're both rebels.
But he's just killed the man she loves, the man that she's just made a commitment to spend the rest of her life with.
Blood is thicker than water in this case.
Oh, I don't know if that was
I get that to a degree, but I think it was so well acted in terms of her, just this passion that she has for her brother. And there was this weird underlying thing, level of, they're in both films. There's this weird sort of sexual, incestual thing going with Tony and his sister. implied in both films. So I think that kind of adds to it.
Is it really implied, or is it more of a case of I'm a man, I know what men want from women, you're my sister, and I don't want you to defile that way? That's how I take it.
Yeah, but it took another level of just possession. And in the 83 one,
Yeah.
blatantly, he says, I'm going to fuck you all around this club. Like, that's not even implied there at all. So what do you feel? Let's just compare the two now. So let's jump into 83, the Palmer's version. Apparently, Al Pacino really pushed to get this made. Like, he saw the one from the 30s, was so in love with it.
Yeah.
He collaborated with a dude and really pushed to get this produced.
So if you think about, so back in 83, right, this film would have only been 50 odd years old at that point.
Only, yeah.
So, yeah. So, well, if you say only, like, imagine Jaws is like 45 years old this year, right? So it would have been something that would probably been still played on TV, probably something that you could probably rent, and probably still a fairly popular-ish film, right? I can kind of see that, and I will say this is probably one of the few occasions where I think the remake really is justified and has its place, because not only have they remade this film, but what they've essentially done is filled in the blanks and actually given these characters like a proper backstory, added some legitimate motivation for some of the characters, and actually modernized the story to fit like the new sort of narrative in like 83. So it's gone, it's not about like dealing alcohol, they're now drug dealers, it's Cubans as opposed to like Italian gangsters.
Cuban immigrant comes into Miami. Tony, shady past, gets shown to be that he was his tattoo shows that he was a hitman in the past. One thing, were you surprised at how much even the look of some of the characters was so similar, like the mistress?
Some of that, even the sister, because I think they like, I mean, I know the hair was totally different, but it kind of, you look at it and it's almost like, that's Poppy.
Similar body types. Everyone's very thin. Michelle Pfeiffer looked quite a lot like Poppy in her style and even the attitude. Like, it was so
Sorry, I didn't mean Poppy. I meant Casca. There was that, and even did Frank? He even had the moustache, right? Robert Loggier's character.
Which one was Frank?
Was that Frank? Was it Frank? I might be getting the name wrong. The boss, the one.
The one he took Tony under his wing.
I will kind of say, just in short, I thought this is my first viewing of Scarface. I thought this film was absolutely phenomenal, right? My stance on long films. This film just breezed by. It did not feel like it was just shy of 3 hours. Not a single frame, not a moment of dialogue was wasted or just added on to pad it out. Every little thing just drew you into this film and just suckered you into like the story.
Overall, obviously, because it breathes, it gives time to really develop most of the characters. The one thing that I will say that I liked from the original, for some reason, I don't know why, but I liked the way Tony and his sister interacted in terms of the progression of their story to the end, more in the original than I did in this one, because I felt in this one it kind of just jumped from him meeting her for the first time, not for the first time, but in 5 years, and then it just jumped from that to her just being in the club when he sees her dancing with some dude, and I felt like it just kind of leaked.
There was a little bit of that with Michelle Pfeiffer's character as well, right? Because essentially it's like they go from like her detesting him to like them getting married, right? I mean, him falling in love with her, and it's kind of like the story is a bit nonsense. But then actually, if I sat there and started thinking about it, I guess Michelle Pfeiffer's character is quite subtle. She's essentially a prisoner, right? She's addicted to like cocaine.
Power.
But she's essentially going from one person to the other who can provide her with what she needs, right? She doesn't really matter whether she loves them or not.
you can still get cocaine from the other guy, but I think it's just okay.
But
He's
she's
getting
no,
old.
but she's like in a prison of her own making. She can't
Yeah.
escape it.
And she just likes these powerful men that she just wants to
Yeah.
lead onto. But yeah, but again, yeah, I think I kind of liked the relationship aspect of Mooney and Caramoli, the Poppy in the original, because they just seem more believable. I kind of hard to believe sometimes that Michelle Pfeiffer would want to go with this little midget, Tony, because it just seemed like a weird mix. Obviously, the '83 is a superior movie overall.
Yeah.
But little things like that. But the music, dude, in the '83 one, that is a big part of that personality of that movie.
Oh, absolutely. And when I was watching the end credits, I didn't realize it was, what's his name? I can't remember what his first name is, but his surname is like Marauder. So I think he's done like you'll probably find he's had like top 10 like music in the charts and stuff.
Yeah, that synth soundtrack, which been sampled a lot. If you're a hip hop fan from the '90s, you see a lot of that music over there. You got to push it to the limit. One of the ultimate montage songs ever. I always loved that as a kid. It's up there with the Karate Kid music and all of those.
The music did suit the film very, very well. And I didn't actually realize, like they had all this 80s music in the film, all that music that's in the film, the actual pop songs and stuff, right? Or disco or whatever, all specifically written for the film. Because I remember Shazamming one and it goes like music from like Scarface. But when you read it at the end, they're all written by the same guy who did the musical score. Oh, there is just so much great imagery. I think I will be watching this film. It'll be one of those sort of films that I'll watch kind of regularly now, like every couple of years. I'm probably going to dive into all the special features and, really get like an understanding of like some of the background stuff. It was just amazing.
How do you feel about the chainsaw scene in the bathroom?
Holy shit, right? Yeah. There's a couple of moments there where you think it's all about to go like Pete Tong, especially when Matey Boy's friend finally gets up there and starts shooting up the place. And I think the guy holding the chainsaw falls backwards. And you're kind of thinking, shit, that's about to like go through him, really, isn't he?
Yeah.
But the fact that he just gets the chainsaw, and then basically chainsaws his way into the hotel room next door.
Oh, so crazy. Or even the dude who Tony goes to Cuba with. Is it Cuba? Yeah. No, it wasn't Cuba. It was what country?
Well, they go to that
to see Sosa.
Oh, they go to I'm going to guess it's Colombia, right?
Colombia, yeah, it would have been Colombia. Yeah. And when the guy goes off, he goes, "Yeah, I'm gonna stay. I'm gonna keep this guy nice."
Yeah.
He goes, and you just see him from the helicopter, just get thrown off and hung from a helicopter. Who does that? Not just to throw him out of the helicopter. They got a hanging from the helicopter.
When you're like a rich drug lord with like your own helicopter, right? You don't do things by half.
Yeah.
You make a point.
And I love Sosa, man. He bucked against the sort of what you'd expect, the cliche portrayal of a Colombian, drug lord. He was very suave and sophisticated, and I like that about him.
Yeah. Much more of a thinking man rather than like what's his name from the Netflix other show, the real what's his name? Pablo Picasso. Not Pablo Picasso, Pablo Escobar.
Yeah. And he warned Tony, you don't
Oh yeah. The thing is, everybody has warned Tony about what to do and not to do. Obviously, Tony essentially is too full of himself, right? His ego, that nobody can touch me, that I'm Tony Montana, you can't take me alive. Which I think goes through both films, really. And do you think, as much as a piece of shit as Tony is in the '83 version, does his humanity, is that his downfall at the end? Because obviously to stay out of prison, he's got to do this little job for his friends in Colombia, right? By killing this guy, by putting a bomb under his car. Like, what a spectacular way to kill someone, right? Again, they could have been a lot more subtle. It could have been a lot easier. And the fact that he doesn't want to kill the women and children.
But do you think that's because of his humanity, or the fact that he just doesn't want to do the bidding of these guys who he basically wants to buck against?
Well, he's not doing their bidding, right? Because essentially it's a quid pro quo. They go, you do this for us, and we will use our connections in Washington to keep you out of prison. Yeah. That's just a business deal, right?
He has no sense. The ego, he's like, I don't need anybody. I can just...
I'm Tony Montana.
Exactly. That's what I get kind of seems to win out in his brain. And interesting, let's go back to the 30s one now. You realize that ending, they both end with Tony getting gunned down. One by the police and one by the Colombians. But do you know that that isn't the original ending that was shown when it was first shown in the cinemas?
What, for the 32 film?
Yeah.
What was the ending?
There's another ending, which
Yeah.
I've actually seen, it's on YouTube, where they actually had to add because of the whole hard time with the censorship. Where Tony comes down the stairs, the police are coming through the door, and they arrest Tony.
Yeah.
And from that point on, the whole thing's done through Tony's POV, and you see him get arrested. He goes to court, and the judge. He's sitting in front of the judge, and the judge gets this whole big monologue about how he's just a piece of shit, how he's just a leech on society, and sentenced to death. And then I think it goes right to the point of him getting hung, I believe. I think it does,
Right.
yeah. When he gets hung and you see from his POV him getting hung, and then it just ends.
So hold on. So that was the original ending, but they changed it before it came out, or
No, it was, they wanted it to be him getting gunned down, but the censors were like, no, we need more of showing justice is truly done. So we want to see him getting judged. So they added this other ending, which later on in the year's time they've gotten rid of and gone back to the
right. Okay, fine. So essentially, what we now have seen is probably more of like a director's cut, right? The director's preferred ending.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay, interesting. I will have to go and check that out. I did. I was kind of wondering if in the '83 version the ending would be similar, because obviously you see Tony in the '32 version, who's acted like this gangster who has felt like invincible, but when push came to shove, he turned into somebody who was begging for his life.
Which is way more of a morality tale there. There's more of an art or more of a lesson to be told to people.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I don't necessarily take this stance, but you could argue that the '83 one was way more of a negative image or did damage, which I think it kind of did, because gangsters, people who portrayed themselves or wanted to be gangsters, were that way because they watched this film.
Oh yeah. And so we've all met a Tony, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there was no real lessons in this film, even though he gets killed at the end.
Yeah.
He doesn't really learn anything as a person. He doesn't, there's no remorse. He doesn't realize the error of his ways. You don't see the coward in him. So he becomes this hero. I remember always growing up thinking people portraying Tony, I want to be like Tony Montana, because even when it comes to the faith.
Oh, I mean, he does lose everything, right? He loses his best friend, he loses his sister, and eventually he loses his life.
He doesn't show any regret for that. He doesn't like, what have I done? I'm sorry, I want to be. There's none of that. He just goes out as a gangster, basically.
Yeah. I've met kind of people like exactly like that. Let's just for one moment talk about. I think we talked about him and Gina's relationship from the earlier film. In this film, like you said, they're really towards the end. This whole thing they lay it out on a plate. Like there is, I guess, this incestuous thing, and to me, that seemed to have just come out of nowhere. But obviously, I may have missed the subtle cues.
I don't think he did, because like I said, that's the one relationship that really jumps. Maybe a little bit with the mistress as well, but they could have done with maybe one other meeting before he sees her in the club with the guy, just to establish that he has still been seeing her, getting to know her.
Yeah, but the fact that she comes there with like her gown all open and obviously quite blatantly, they've got like sticky tape there to like keep it in place. And the fact that she's just firing off shots and like just still angry the fact that he's killed her husband, but like acknowledging what he might be thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You see, I like the little laugh that she has when she finally hits him in the legs. You see, there's a little bit of that Tony in her, a little bit of that mad. Again, very much like the original.
And then Elvira, like once she leaves the restaurant, you do not know what happens to her. You don't see her again. There's no like end to her story. Yeah. Did she get away? Did Tony have her killed?
Just moved on to the next.
Yeah.
What do you think of Michelle Pfeiffer in this?
Fucking hell. So essentially, Michelle Pfeiffer was one of the most beautiful actresses of that period. She didn't really get to shine in this film. She didn't get anything really meaty, but like what she did have, she really played really well. She really played this sort of like rich, spoiled woman who had no time for anything but herself.
Yeah.
And she played that to perfection. But then you also have that period where in that dinner scene at the end, right, where essentially she kind of breaks down and she's had enough of Tony, where he's just like basically just shitting on her and just shitting on her. And you kind of see like that kind of emotion like on her face where she's at the end of her tether as well.
Do you think it's ironic that a movie where most of the people were Cubans, characters-wise, the actual actors, for the most part, I think besides one, were Italian?
I think back in those days, it didn't really matter, right? You don't really have this now, like, oh, you're doing a movie about like Cubans, it must be all Cubans. You're doing like characters about Japan, they must be Japanese actors. I guess you get the best actor for the role, right? And to be honest, if you don't know where Al Pacino has come from, he could quite easily pass as a Cuban.
Yeah, he was pretty famous by this point anyway, but still, yeah, I think our people more willing to be like, fuck it, who cares?
Yeah.
So, damn. So, ratings, I guess we gotta go.
Wow, right. Okay, I think, honestly, I think the 83 movie is a 5 out of 5 stars film, right? There's just no question about it. It's an absolutely phenomenal film. If you have not seen this film, just go and watch it. I watched it on like
Everybody
a 4K film.
it.
I'm sure there may well be someone out there who hasn't, so go and see it. And if you have seen it, check out the 4K version. It's just absolutely beautiful looking. The 32 version, I would probably mark it a little bit down, potentially a 3.5. I don't know how much rewatch value there is in that film if you've got like the more modern take.
I'm actually going to give the 32 one a surprising 4 stars because I was surprised how much I enjoyed this. Maybe it helps having and knowing the 80s version so well. There was just watching the 30s one. There was all these little surprises saying, "Oh, they kept that's from where that they used that and that." Maybe that added to the the funness of watching the 30s one. But
I think the one that stands out the most is, you know, once the hit's been taken out on Tony, it's all the scene's almost identical when he's, you know, in the 32 version, he's at some place where he's on the phone, he's trying to get hold of like his boy, and he basically tells the guy, "I want you to phone at 3:00 sharp." Yeah, that's almost identical. What do you give like the 83 then?
5, definitely.
5. And then obviously, just before we sign off, then obviously there is plans for a remake.
Yes. So we've seen with the 30s to the 80s, it can be done. And you what you do is you take the base elements of the original and you just build on it. You put it in a new place and you just build on the world. And that's how you really do a remake. You don't just try and do what Snyder does and make a complete one-for-one. Actually, no, that's not fair because he didn't do that with Dawn of the Dead. He actually did like new stuff. But so that's what they've got to do if they do it again. But what could they do with that one to make it work?
So it is a different ethnicity that they're doing, right? They're not concentrating on Cubans.
I don't think anyone knows yet.
I know.
Do Cuban though. There's no way they can do that one.
Yeah, again. No. I think they have mentioned like what not race. I guess where it's going to be based. I think that has been announced.
Mexicans though, to make it has to be relevant for each time that it gets made, isn't it? So Italians for the 30s, Cubans.
I just don't feel that they could get the soul and the gist and do it as well as they did with 83. I don't think you could get the caliber of the actors. You know, unless they're getting like Leonardo DiCaprio or somebody to be in this film, I really don't think they could get anyone to do justice the way Al Pacino was in this film. I don't think they could make an almost 3-hour movie and make it feel like it's only an hour and a half.
Yeah, because I guess it's been in development hell for a while because we've really spoken about this a year ago. So God knows what's happening, especially now when it's happening.
But both of us have just given it a 5 out of 5, right? So that's essentially almost like a perfect film. You're basically trying to improve on perfection. And actually, you know what? It's 83, right? So that movie in itself is almost 30 years. No, it's almost 40 years old. It's about 35 years old or something, right? 37. And just imagine, I'm somebody who's never seen it before, right? So I don't have nostalgia from when I was a teenager or a child thinking, I watched that film, it was a good film. I've watched it like fresh for the first time. And still, after all these years, I'm like, that's an incredible film.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, guys. So, what obviously going to be the A? Everyone freaking loves the A's, but I'm curious. What do you what do you enjoy? Were you surprised? Have you seen the one from the 30s? And if you haven't, you should. It's actually worth checking out, I feel. It's worth looking, even if it's just for reference. I think it's good to remember where things come from. So if you go from here, I don't know. We'll let you know, guys. So from me, the race.
From me, Mo.
See you guys next week.